It's the Sod Pod, brought to you by Grassland Agro. The Sod Pod. Hello, and welcome to the Sod Pod. This is episode 2. I'm joined with Eoin Quinn, Edward Healy, and John O'Loughlin. And look, we're into the beginning of February already. What a fast January, thank God. Today we're going to have a big conversation, really, and it's the time is now, the spring rotation planner. Let's get out there and see how we get organised for first grazing. Lads, what's the crack? What should a farmer be looking for? What should he have done already?
How's things, James? First of all, I'd like to say Happy New Year to you. This is my first time on the Sod Pod this year now, so fair play to you. Thanks for having me.
You're subbed back in, Ed.
Sub back in, yes. The super sub, James. Super sub. That's what I am. I mightn't be the housewife's favourite now, but I'm the super sub. Part of the B team, and that is. Yeah, sure. Look, it's an interesting time of the year, James. Lads are starting to get busy calving cows, and believe it or believe it not, now there's people already considering getting out cows down around the southeast anyway. Mm-hmm. Guys starting to talk a little bit about urea and really having a look at fertilizer programs for the season going ahead. So it is an interesting time. It's a time for planning, I suppose, and figuring out things for the season ahead.
And how does the spring rotation planner work?
I suppose, look, on that, it's different on every single farm. You're going to have a difference in dates, I suppose, where guys are getting out cows, especially on drier farms and on heavier farms. But really the whole thing with the spring rotation planner is to try and get a certain percentage of the farm grazed by a certain date. Really,
you're dead right, Ed. It's really important. I suppose the spring rotation planner, I suppose what you're trying to do is get all the farm grazed so that you can have enough grass coming back so that you're comfortable when you start your second rotation, that you can go through a quicker round. Basically, the first thing that you need to do is you need to do an opening cover to understand the grass or the feed available on the farm. And it's actually very simple, but it's a very reliable tool. And it basically boils down into you graze a third of the farm in February, a third from the end of February until St. Patrick's Day, and then the final third from St. Patrick's Day until the 5th of April on a dry farm. But as Ed quite rightly said, the dates will change, and that could be the 10th of April on a heavier farm. And to do that, I suppose you need to be organised. So you need to have your cover done. You need to understand where the cows are going to go first. So that's in relation to ground conditions. You need to have your strip wires up. You need to have back fences organised. You need to have water organised. So the reason that you have maybe a third in February is because as cows calve, you get them out. And it is quite right. I was chatting to a few guys, chatting to Miguel Walsh there, who's up in Laois there, who was in the Grass 10 competition previously. He cows out Tuesday and Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. And I'm sure he will have cows out for the next couple of days as well. So really, really positive that lads are getting out. So listen, the advantages of that is that you're training the cow number one to graze for the year. You're conditioning the sward as well, which is really important. And you're getting the cheapest and the best quality feed into the cow. Mm-hmm. So that's really, really important. There's lots of advantages to it. Getting out in springtime is the most value you're going to get from your grass because it's a direct replacement for either silage, maize silage, zero graze grass, and most of all concentrate, which is one of the most expensive feeds. Sorry, Eoin. And I know that you've been out with the plate meter this week as well to get an opening cover for yourself and the brothers at home.
Oh yeah, 100%. I've got all grease, John, ready to go. Plate meter there, so turn out any day now. I was going to ask you the question. Think back to last year. What's the advice for this year if we encounter something similar in terms of, challenging conditions? Or were many fit to go out last year and stay out? Or, just can we learn from last year? Is kind of what I'm pointing at.
Yeah, I think we can, Owen, and I suppose what's really important is sticking to the percentages. It's a brilliant tool. Any year, depending on the year that's thrown at us, it has worked perfectly so that you get your grazing targets right. you get a proper soil nutrition program in place, and come the 1st to the 5th of April, you're going to have the 11-1200 back on that first graze paddock, or sometimes it's the second or third graze paddock, because the first graze paddock, cows are in and out and they're traipsing. You have a handful of cows out, and they maybe muck it up a little bit. But what we learned last year was, I suppose, we had a good February, and we maybe were slightly ahead on our percentages. Some people were 40%, 50% grazed by the 1st of March, but then March hit that in the head. Yeah. So the weather actually looked after it first, because cows were back in. I had a lot of debates over and back with one of our own team, Dylan Hoolan, on what was the right way to do it. But in reality, if we stick to the percentages and we apply spring nitrogen and we have side fertility, we're relatively okay, and we try and address any issues maybe with slurry or an early shot of phosphorus, we will get the first grazed paddock back to 1200. And that's really what you're working for. The positives are, the real good lads I've seen do this now, and I'm not going to mention any names, but there's guys down in Waterford now, and they're really good at it. So they graze all the farm, all the silage ground, and what they actually do is they're able to graze the silage ground again in around the last couple of days of March, the first couple of days of April. And what that allows is that you've real good quality silage, obviously, because you're starting from a clean base, but it allows you a little bit of a pressure valve. So if you're coming tight, or maybe the grass isn't coming back well enough, or you're aggressively grazing, trying to work through, getting as much grass into the diet early on. So that works really well. It's not possible for everyone, and this is the big thing. And this is where the principles are still the same, but maybe our interpretation of it is a little bit wrong, in the fact that in some farms, the silage ground isn't on the platform.
Yeah.
But so that's obviously going to have a big impact, because when we get into the 5th of April, grass is really kicking off. We're able to meet our grass demand with growth rates, because soil temperatures are increasing, daylight hours are increasing, solar radiation is increasing. But if you stick to the same principles, you obviously have to put in more feed. And what's really important is to have good quality silage, so that you can supplement that to the cows as well in springtime on. And it's really important in the system that's run in Northern Ireland as well.
Oh, absolutely. I suppose the other debates that you have to consider, just before we move on, what you're chatting about, slurry. Is there a decision that has to be made there in some shape or form, that do I either go out across you're talking about utilising the graze on the silage ground, do I go out with slurry? Obviously, then do you hold back? So a little bit maybe comes down to the fact that, are you able to cope with the storage? And look, that's going to vary between farm, obviously, isn't it? I know there was debate of shortening the closed period in the south last year. It didn't happen because it was delayed. But moving forward, if that becomes the case, could you see that being a potential issue, in the fact that the closed period becomes shorter? You need more storage. It might influence decisions like that. That's, but hopefully it won't come to that, but you could see it.
But I suppose, John, I just want to go back there for a second. In simple, and I think it's a great way you've broke it down there. Graze a third of the farm in February. Graze the second third by St. Patrick's Day, which is a 2.5 week window. And then we get that final third by the 1st to the 10th of April. That's your drier farm. And as you said, weather dependent or heavier farms might have to add on 7 to 14 days. And if we go back then, as Eoin said, to last year, where the guys that got out early, and some got out in that early graze, or started actually in nearly the middle of January last year.
Yeah.
So why? And then that bad weather that came in March, that scuppered another section. But they got such a great bounce on being out so early and getting them good graze outs. So that did save a lot of farms. But we know a lot of pits are very empty today out there.
Yeah, they are, Jim. And what generally typically happens, people are cautious about turning out the cows early. And then what they end up doing, they end up having to, in around early April, is to take out a whole sweep of bales, because grass has just got on top of them, or else they're not able to keep on top of grass. So absolutely, but if we stick to the overall percentages, time after time, it works a solid finest, Jim. So it's a really useful tool. And the beauty of the spring rotation planner is you don't have to be walking the farm 40 times in the year. You have to understand your open cover is very important, but then if you divide it up you're relatively okay. Like, we'd be hoping that farmers maybe do 2 farm walks in February, but that's the busiest time of the year for a lot of farms, and then maybe 3 in March. But in reality, the key benefit for this is that you have cows out of the shed, they're producing less slurry, you have less cubicles to bed. It's really good for the cows, it's really good for the farmer, it's a little bit less work. Some farmers have battled back and say it's more work to, I suppose, be letting them in and out, but that's where it comes back to having the grazing infrastructure right and being well set up. It's really, really good to have ground grazed off before you apply slurry, Ed.
Yeah, look, exactly. Chapter are getting, I suppose, a little bit easier there in terms of getting out with slurry when you're looking at trail and shoe and that end of things. But I suppose the whole thing that you're trying to do with your first grazing is your first grazing is simple. I don't know about simple, but the first grazing in general, really, what you're trying to do is you're trying to clean up the sward. So you're grazing off everything that's in front of the cow. And when you're doing that, you're helping to wake the plant up from its dormancy. So if you help to wake the plant up from its dormancy, it's going to be a lot more likely to utilize the nutrients that it's been given in the slurry to grow a lot more readily. So it's very, very, very important, especially with water quality issues and things like that we've been given or that are going on at the moment, that we actually utilize our slurry in the best way possible. So if we're able to get out, clean off that sward, wake that plant up, it's going to be a lot more likely to utilize those nutrients in an efficient way. And I suppose we'll be slightly less likely to having nutrients getting into groundwater and ultimately having deteriorating water quality. I suppose, look, on the slurry end of things, I just want to put this out there to the floor. You know, John and Eoin and Jesus, James, if you want to get involved here, you flake away there. But I suppose, look, a question that I've been getting over the last few days is in terms of urea. You know, no one wants to be the very first person to get it out, but everyone wants to know, is anyone talking about it at the moment, or is anyone looking at it? And I suppose in terms of that early nitrogen and its value, it is going to be, you know, probably the least efficient nitrogen that goes out of the year. But in my opinion, it is absolutely vital to try and have that little bit of nitrogen in solution in the soil to help that grass to come back in for that second round, because that's generally where guys normally get caught. I don't know, what's your opinion on that, or what would you think for a fertilizer strategy starting off early in the year, lads?
Yeah,
I think I'll feel that one there, John.
Oh, sorry, doing work with.
I think if you think about this, Edward, obviously urea needs its oxygen to work. And when we spread out slurry, that will actually limit the amount of oxygen available to the urea. So you have to leave enough of a breaking point of time to allow that urea. Obviously, John, in the protected urea market that we're in now, at least the urea is a bit more protected than the old, but we have to just be conscious of that.
No, you're right, Jim. Again, as always. And Ed, you're right as well that we get the lowest maybe kilo N that we apply for grass that we grow. It's probably the lowest, but it's the most valuable grass. Mm-hmm. So early nitrogen is very important. It probably feeds into a wider debate I've been having with a few people, and they've come to me with this, because everyone's going to say, oh, these lads are all working for a fertilizer company now. Of course, they're going to say it's spread more fertilizer, but in reality, grass growth has suffered a lot last year. As part of it is P&K, part of it is nitrogen. But in reality, we are reliant on nitrogen. The clover won't be active early, so we're going to have to drive grass through chemical or organic nitrogen. I suppose the urea or slurry debate, it depends on your soil fertility on the farm. We've been using the slurry just for the nitrogen, and to be honest, it's bad economics because most of the value of the slurry is in the P&K. So getting back to where you're going to have a high demand, the likes of silage ground, or where your lowest soil fertility, that's where you target your slurry first. So getting out with early nitrogen is absolutely crucial. A couple of things to take into account is, I suppose, the long-term forecast and ground conditions and the 6 degrees and rising, so you're going to get a response, the age of the sward, when you're going to turn out the cows. So your demand is very, very important. Like going back to opening covers, maybe in the spring rotation planner, cows were housed early and there is a lot of grass on farm, but I suppose it's about getting that grass up and going once it's grazed. And in reality, as Ed pointed out, probably the best fertilizer in springtime is a grazing, as I often say. So graze that, get nitrogen, and then the other key nutrient is phosphorus. And phosphorus is very important in springtime.
Look, whenever you think phosphorus, you automatically think rooting, you think tiller. And so, as Ed rightly touched on, the plant's relatively dormant over the winter. So whenever it comes to spring, the first thing the plant wants to do is to get going. It wants to tiller, it wants to root. And to do that, it falls upon phosphorus. If there's a deficiency of phosphorus in the system, that hits that process. Ultimately, and knocks your nitrogen efficiency. So, yeah, really, John, what you'd be looking at there in terms of a sward that's very, very lumpy, you might find it slow to get going. So, yeah, 100%. That's where the importance of phosphorus would come in there. So, to me, phosphorus is a spring product. You're not going to go lashing on the back end, are you? Definitely not a bad time to gauge where you're at in terms of your P. I know, particularly, I suppose, with yourselves in terms of regulations, it's got a lot tighter. So there's challenges this year that people are going to be faced with that they may not previously been faced with when it comes to decision making. Maybe say around reseeds, how am I going to reseed without a P allowance? But they're all challenges that we'll have to just work around, aren't they?
I think the whole thing, right, with farming is that every farm situation is going to be slightly different, and flexibility comes into farming a huge amount. The farmers that are in the drier areas are obviously going to be able to get out animals come the end of January, beginning of February. There's other areas of the country that won't have animals out until March, and they're going to be in a totally different situation in terms of spring grazing. Same thing when it comes to fertilizer strategy or getting out slurry. So, look, you can only play the field that's in front of you, and every farm situation is going to be slightly different. What works for one is not going to be the same on the next farm. And in the end of the day, you have to find what works for you on your farm. And look, I suppose the whole thing at the moment there is try to get the best advice. If you're unsure about anything, try and find someone that is an expert in that area. Where if that is a farmer in your discussion group that's very good at something simple, or the likes of your local grassland agro rep that can help on the fertilizer strategy end of things, or the soil fertility strategy end of things. The whole thing is about, I suppose, surrounding yourself with people that can help you with each area of your farm, and I suppose bring some knowledge transfer onto the farm, and actually so you can look at different areas that you could improve. But my whole thing is be flexible, find what works for you and go with that.
So I suppose when we're talking early nitrogen, we know, regardless of the whole situation, we know that there are going to be problems associated with nitrates, aren't there? So the age-old debate, as John says, yes, it's your highest quality grass, but it's such an uncertain time of year. Like, goodness, look at last year, the weather just like a flick of a switch, and it just was the difference between day and night. So I suppose the shift away from maybe can-based fertilizers gives you maybe that wee bit of added protection. If you think calcium ammonium nitrate, 50% nitrate based, it's sitting in automatic plant available form. If it isn't utilised, it'll just make, I suppose, a beeline for the waterways. And you know yourself, nitrate is one of the key indicators of water quality. So it is such an uncertain time of year, and they are decisions that have to be made on an individual farm basis, really. Yeah,
you're right on that. Like, the form of nitrogen in spring is really, really important. So if you go away from the can and use urea, I suppose the urea has to transform to ammonium and then to nitrate, and that process is driven by soil temperature. When it's a little bit cooler in spring, it takes a little bit longer, and you have a delayed reaction. And obviously there's phase release nitrogen products on the market as well from ourselves, and they'd work very well in that spring application period. So, like, the form of nitrogen is really important, and then obviously you can go and you can use protected urea as well, and that has benefits over can, especially in relation to nitrous oxide on.
100%, John. Whenever I think, I suppose, one of the key parameters you think is nitrous oxide, and whenever we actually consider nitrous oxide, it is the real focal point around it regarding emissions. And the reason for that is that it actually is a very potent greenhouse gas. 1 kilo of nitrous oxide is expressed as a CO2 equivalent. So it's 268 CO2 equivalents. Ammonia, which again, it's a very, very topical greenhouse gas in itself. It's 2.2. So 268 versus 2.2. I suppose ammonia is very, very geared towards agriculture, given the fact that 90% of it all comes from agriculture. Split that down again in terms of ammonia. 25% will come from your slurry spreading, hence your less systems, and the rest of which will come from fertiliser, but particularly in relation to nitrous oxide. So shifting away from CAN, which is nitrate based and can have a high potential for nitrous oxide emissions, is going to be very, very beneficial. Another way that I look at it, John, is the fact that we think of nitrates being leached, we think of nitrous oxide, we think of ammonia, and when we go for protected urea, we're limiting that. Whilst we're thinking obviously towards the environment, at the end of the day, it's an economic loss to yourself. The reality is, if we're losing these avenues of loss to the atmosphere, it's a loss to the pocket. So you don't set out to buy your nitrogen for it to be lost within the system. You buy it to be geared towards the plant and to the crop. So it's very important to look at it from, I think, both points of view.
Absolutely, Eoin, and that's why I suppose the Glaze, the Pro 18s, 27s and 24s, which are the protected urea compounds, are such a big innovation for the Irish marketplace. Previously, it wasn't possible to have the MBPT protected compounds, and now it is. So really, really positive, and really looking forward to seeing how they go on farm this year as well, and getting them out onto farm and driving on.
And Edward, any final thoughts before we move on to what's in the news?
No, sure. Look, I think the lads have covered the likes of the nitrogen and the protected ureas there quite comprehensively, James. For me, there's a huge amount of things there that can be overcomplicated, I suppose. Keep the systems simple. Find what works for your farm. Surround yourself with people that are experts on those different topics, and that's all I can say, really.
What's in the news? Right, lads, we're into that what's in the news section now. And Edward was scrolling through the papers during the week, and he's decided to choose an article. Rumour has it he was distracted by the picture on the top of this article. Ed, what's the article you want to discuss?
Yeah, sure. Look, there's been huge interest in the likes of the Grass 10 over the last couple of seasons, and I was flicking myself through the Farmer's Journal there the other day, and I couldn't help but notice a big smiley Tony Kelly wannabe on the front page.
Who's that?
I'm joking. No, he wasn't on the front page because he wouldn't make it. So he wouldn't, James. It'd have to be a fairly slow news now for that. But John O'Loughlin was out on farm as part of the team that were interviewing the Grass 10 finalists of the year. Look, there was some very interesting farms involved in the competition there this year, and I suppose I just wanted to ask John O'Loughlin there on his a few comments on what he's seen as part of the competition, and a few things that he thought might be interesting for the listeners.
Yeah, no, it's thanks very much, Ed, for a very kind introduction to what's in the news, and for your kind comments. I suppose the article meet the Sustainable Grass and Farm of the Year finalists, and there's more to follow, but in the first in this series, I suppose, there was Evan Hunt in Tubbercurry in County Sligo, and we were out on that farm, and I suppose doing a super job. The one thing about all the farms that were featured in the first article is they were all kind of outside of the main, what we would consider dairy belts, and they're all doing a super job with grass and with clover. They're in higher rainfall areas and more challenging soil types. Patrick O'Neill was in Longford. Now, he was telling us that the farm was wet, and I can conclusively say that it wasn't coming from West Clare, but there was obviously a lot of rain in the back end. It's not Moore Park either, so like it is great to see what he's doing with clover. Killian Brennan, Cavan, that was heavier, and Killian has built up the farm over a number of years and is making 120 cows there now, and just a really good news story. I suppose we walked the platform, and he's relatively highly stocked in the platform. We went around the platform, nice grass, clover, good infrastructure as we were talking about. But we went over to the out farm then, Ed, and I suppose like we were driving up the lane, this out farm, and it was real kind of, I suppose, dry stock country all around it. And as we were driving up the lane in the passage of this out farm, we came in, there was 20 acres that he was after sowing all in red clover. With the challenging weather we got, he still managed to get a cut there in late October. So really, really positive to see. And like you look over the ditch then, and it was all rushes and misfortune, and so it shows that, I suppose for me, it shows that the clover thing is possible, not just in Moore Park and the other Teagasc research centres.
It's very, I suppose it's very interesting to see guys that probably are slightly, are working in probably less than ideal conditions in terms of red clover, how they actually manage it. Because I suppose there would have been probably a story out there that nobody in slightly heavier conditions could put in red clover, especially with getting cuts come the end of the year. So that's I suppose worthwhile to be able to see going around the place. And just so you know, lads, John O'Loughlin means absolutely no offence to this man's neighbours.
Yeah. Which it was more like homemade, to be honest, and another
your
story.
home in Kilkenny is not like that at all, John.
I'm not from Kilkenny, so that's great. But I was on that farm. Another good story from that farm in Cavan is that one of the judges, who remained nameless, lost her welly and had to be evacuated out of a hole with lots of support. So that was an amusing one. But you go back to Sligo, brilliant clover, really good operator, new entrant to dairy, doing things really, really right. Has taken on a lot of land and has done a really good job in receiving. One thing that stuck with me on that farm was that the first thing that they do when they take on land is the spread line. So straight away, bang, done. Patrick O'Neill then. Patrick, I suppose, was away travelling and came back. He was carpenter by trade, and the incorporation of clover onto the farm consistently was absolutely super. And Patrick was really good at communicating the clover story as well. And then Patrick and Killian are both part of the Clover 150 group, which is a really progressive group that's all over the country, where they're trying to get clover onto farms. And I suppose one of the things maybe that you see from all of the contestants is that maybe grass production is back a little bit, and that goes back into what we were chatting about earlier, about maybe supplying slightly higher rates of nitrogen within obviously the regulations at the right times, maybe a little bit earlier, so that we can grow that grass. Because in reality, if we don't have grass, we don't have anything. It's the only competitive advantage that we have in Ireland, is our ability to grow grass. So it's really, really important we safeguard that, and we try and drive it on as much as possible.
It'll be a tough competition this year, John, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was brilliant. There's to be more to come as well, but the farmers were absolutely super and really hospitable and really, really generous with their time. And I'm not sure exactly when the award ceremony is going to be, but it'll be in the not too distant future. And it'll be brilliant to get the profile of these farmers and hear from them, and we might hopefully get a few of them onto the side pod.
John, just before you finish up there,
yeah,
if someone is listening to this and they would like to actually go, we might get one or two, James, hopefully all going well now. John, if someone actually is listening to this and they say, right, okay, that might be something I want to take part in going forward, how does someone actually go about applying for the Grass 10 or getting some information on it?
Yeah, so after the award ceremony, they probably launched in around the same time the competition for 2024, and we'll probably cover it here on this side, and we might get on John or Joe Dunphy to have a chat with us. But it's basically done through your advisor. But you really want to be thinking about it now if you're going to have a cut of this. There's a criteria where you submit your pasture bait, slag and details to be able to look at maybe the number of walks that you've done previously. And one of the big things going forward now, Ed, is the amount of clover on the farm. That's really, really important. And I suppose that's why it's changed to the Sustainable Grassland Farmer of the Year, because they want clover. Listen, it's definitely a debate. Clover is very important that we incorporate as much as possible on farm, but people are at different stages of the development with clover. So I'd encourage anyone that's interested maybe to reach out to their Teagasc advisor and look out for any of the publications in the journal or through Teagasc for the application details.
That's great, folks. Thank you very much. Just one more time, the name of that article, Meet the Sustainable Grassland Farmer of the Year finalists by Aidan Brennan. There's more of them to follow. There was just 3 on, as John said. We'll drop a link into the description of the podcast. You can click on that there and follow it through. Mind yourselves out there. Farm smart, farm safe. Hey, thanks for listening to the Sod Pod. We hope you enjoyed it. To find out more, head over to www.grasslandagro.ie or check out our social channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. That's all for this episode. See you next time.